What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Historically Athletic with CY the Guy and Big J over here, coming at you live from Richardson, Texas. And we're brought to you, sponsored by Davis and Stanton Promotions, providing quality corporate apparel, business gifts, and promotional products since 1949. Family owned, veteran owned, and Texas born.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
We appreciate everything that Davis and Stanton has done, kind of providing us the studio space and everything else that they do. Exceptional company. I've seen their product. I've seen their work. No complaints on my end, that's for sure.
But today we're going to get into some fun talk here. You know, we got the NFL draft starting up. Tomorrow, the first round, going to be tomorrow night, which is April 28th in Vegas. Big show that the NFL Network's been running all week long, obviously in preparation for it. And we wanted to kind of just go ahead and, we did a little bit of a draft preview a couple episodes back. But we wanted to just kind of bring it back to fruition here and talk some of the team needs leading up to this first round, and then also go over some of the best players drafted in history over these 32 NFL teams. And then I think we'll end with a little bit of on a lighter note, talking about some of the biggest draft busts.
That's a pretty long list, but we have condensed it down for you. You'll recognize these names pretty easily, though obviously for the reasons that they are being mentioned. Unfortunately, their fame is preceded by the fact that they were a bust rather than for their career itself.
Yeah.
But I mean, It's just a fact of life. Not every pick is going to pan out. Not every prospect. There are certain things that you can't measure. There are certain things that you can't really quantify until they get on the field, until they gel with a team, and then figure out where they fit, if they fit. It's not always going to work perfectly. But again, we are in the NFL offseason, so it really does make sense to kind of do more of the stuff with regards to the NFL draft. And we are going to go through the best players that have been picked by each NFL team. A lot of these lists kind of came from Clutch Points and Bleacher Report. Just to kind of give you an idea of where some of this is coming from. But, of course, a lot of it, I guess you could say, is common knowledge in a lot of ways.
A lot of it's common knowledge. And then, obviously NFL.com has a big portion.
They have a bevy of information. And then ProFootballNetwork.com is kind of one of the things that we use to kind of get an idea of the draft needs for each of these teams.
Yeah.
So just to give you an idea. And we'll start with the AFC East. We'll take care of the AFC first, and then we'll swing into the NFC. And we'll start with the NFC in the NFC East and then work our way to the NFC South to finish out. So just to kind of give you an idea of the order of ceremonies, if you will, in terms of going down the list. We're not going by draft order. We're just going by division and working our way down.
Yeah, not really going in any specific order as far as like this is the best player ever drafted or anything of that nature.
Not at all.
But I mean, I guess you could kind of start off with, the GOAT himself in the New England Patriots, going back to that 1999 draft in which...
2000.
It was 2000?
It was 2000.
Excuse me there. In which Tom Brady was drafted out of Michigan in the 6th round.
After everything that he went through with Drew Henson, it's pretty amazing that he was able to get drafted and be behind Drew Bledsoe. Bledsoe gets hurt on that infamous hit by the Jets linebacker Lewis, and then just kind of goes from there. One of the best value picks of all time, probably the best draft pick of all time if we're really thinking about it. And then, of course, he's also had other teammates that were there with the Pats to kind of help him along. Teddy Bruschi out of Arizona, outstanding linebacker for years. Julian Edelman, of course, out of Kent State, which I saw Kent State.
Quarterback.
He was a quarterback.
Yeah.
I see Kent State a lot more on this list than I expected. And then, of course, Rob Gronkowski out of Arizona as well. So 2 Arizona players have made a pretty big impact on the Patriots long term.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting. But did you want to go over kind of what their I've got their needs in front of me. My apologies.
Another one that I wanted to add to that list is Troy Brown. I mean, he was kind of a steal. He was picked up in the 8th round in the 1993 draft, and I mean, he returned kicks. He was a standout receiver for them for many years. So, they definitely have a longer list there of good draft picks, but like I said, we just want to condense these for you guys because we could just talk when it comes to that sort of stuff.
We know you only have so much time on your hands on your commute to work or just during your downtime at home when you're, when your kiddo's crying or you hanging out with your wife. Like, I'm sure your wife doesn't want to listen. No, I'm kidding. Totally kidding. We appreciate all of our listeners, men and women alike. And with the Patriots in particular, they're looking for corners, wideouts, safeties, linebackers, and offensive tackles. I mean, J.C. Jackson just left, which is huge. And at the end of the day,
Shaq Mason
left at right guard. So I mean, Belichick's got a really good history when it comes to drafting. Obviously, he's had a great run in New England for a long time. Mac Jones coming out last year and doing as well as he did within that system and with the players around him. They need to get him some more weapons.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it shakes out for them.
You could argue that was a lot of the reason why Brady ended up leaving and all that drama that happened towards the end of his career in New England as well. So getting those receivers out there, obviously Belichick being that defensive mind, they're going to want some defensive players in there too.
There wasn't exactly Randy Moss waiting for him when Brady left New England, to be fair. The next one's going to be the New York Jets. And really the three that come to mind off the top of my head are going to be Darrelle Revis, or better known as Revis Island. He was drafted out of the University of Pittsburgh. Mark Gastineau, standout defensive lineman out of Arizona State. And then Nick Mangold. I still remember watching Nick Mangold when he was in college at Ohio State. Outstanding center. And he was really good with the Jets for a good period of time when he came out.
He was like the face of the Jets for a while there too.
Yeah. Didn't you have another Jets player on there that was kind of like a steal when it came to the draft?
Yeah, this goes back to 1977. In that draft, they got the player named Joe Klecko. And, I mean, he was a heyday defensive tackle. He could play in, he could play out. You could kind of compare him to like a Reggie White or a Justin Tuck of more recent days. And he was taken in the 6th round, so definitely a big steal there. And just unfortunately, injuries kind of derailed his career long term. Otherwise, a lot of analysts think that he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer for sure.
Interesting. So hopefully for the Jets and their fans, they're able to kind of identify what they need. They kind of need everything. I mean, they're rebuilding the roster. It's year 2 of the Robert Saleh era there. And they need a safety, they need linebackers, corners, wide receivers, and an edge player. And basically, since they took Zach Wilson last year, they're really going to try to build around him.
Yeah.
And, they signed Jordan Whitehead from the Bucs. So
that's
that's a really good safety move. And they kept Braxton Berrios, who had a nice season last year. I'm curious to see what the Jets do to kind of attack this because they've got a decent amount of picks in this upcoming draft.
Right.
So we'll see how it shakes out.
And then, moving on to the Bills, in Buffalo, they've had quite a few good players draft over the years, and including one of the great O.J. Simpson of his time. Bruce Smith, that defensive lineman, he was fantastic. He was nasty. And then, Jim Kelly, who actually played a little stint in the USFL. But
with the Houston Gamblers.
But if my memory serves correctly, the Bills had drafted him that same year, and because they drafted him, they held his rights. So when the USFL folded, he came to Buffalo.
And he was not excited about going to Buffalo because of the cold weather. He was trying to get away from the cold. But I mean, he has multiple interviews stating that from back in the '80s. But then again, worked out pretty okay for him. They really adore him in Buffalo, and for good reason. It still boggles my mind that they were able to get Andre Reed out of Kutztown. Never even heard of that. And then of course Josh Allen out of Wyoming. Everybody looked at that as a huge risk.
That's a big risk. So far it's panned out. I mean, obviously they haven't gotten a Super Bowl out of it, but that's the hopes. We got a player of Josh Allen's caliber.
They've done really well with him the last 2 years, and they've pushed Kansas City hard.
Yeah.
So,
and Oklahoma State's own Thurman Thomas, great running back.
Him and Barry Sanders, 2 outstanding running backs out of Stillwater. But we can move on to the to Miami. So of course the Dolphins are known for drafting Dan Marino out of Pitt. Of course, they also had Mark Clayton, catching balls from Marino. He was out of Louisville. Mm-hmm. And then 2 of the guys on this list that were a little bit more recent were Zach Thomas out of Texas Tech and Jason Taylor out of Akron.
Those are some of my favorite defensive players watching growing up. I mean,
didn't they play under Jimmy for a little while? Maybe it was Zach specifically.
Yeah, I think Jimmy did, or for sure. But yeah, they were definitely some of my favorite. And then obviously you can go back to their heyday in the 70s with Larry Zonka and Bob Greasy.
But then didn't you have another one from their defense?
Yep, from the 7th round in the 1970 draft, Jake Scott, that safety. You can kind of think of him as NFL.com's Elliot Harrison wrote this article here. You kind of think of him as the Ed Reed of the 70s. Mm-hmm. Ball hawking safety, played all over the place. he actually picked off 2 passes in Super Bowl 7, which earned him the MVP honors. So I mean, he was a 5-time Pro Bowler, great player, picked up in the 7th round. So some of these players that have been drafted by these teams, as far as considering their greatest players of their team or the franchise, were actually steals too in the draft, which is really cool.
Yep. And then in terms of what they need in this year's draft, they need a center, a safety, an offensive tackle, an edge player, and a linebacker. I mean, Miami's been super active on the free agency front. They've brought in Raheem Mostert.
Weapons. Yeah, they got the weapons.
They got to a Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds. They grabbed, of course, Tyreek Hill in that big trade with the Chiefs. They got Connor Williams from the Cowboys. They brought in Terron Armstead to play left tackle from the Saints. I mean, they've spent some money and they've spent some draft capital to really upgrade their roster. It seems curious to me that they would have let Flores go right before this big roster makeover. Not to say that McDaniel isn't going to do a good job there. Just interesting. It is Mike McDaniel that took over there, correct?
Yeah. It's just unfortunate to me that a lot of these franchises, give these head coaches like
3 years.
2-3 years to
It's
turn
not enough
around.
time.
You can't turn around a franchise. Everyone can't be Jimmy Johnson coming off that, 89 to 90 season and, turning around winning 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. Like,
It's a culture thing, too.
It's just not going to happen. But, it's one of those things, it just depends on, like you said, the culture, your environment, the fans, the owners, so forth and so on. All these factor in, but
absolutely. And then the next one I think we had was the AFC champion Bengals.
Yeah,
man, that is weird and
weird
also kind of awesome to say. Of course, Anthony Munoz out of USC, one of the best offensive linemen of all time. Of course, recently you got Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase both out of LSU. That connection they had in 2019 for their title. And then, of course, they had two quarterbacks, both Boomer Esiason out of Maryland and Kenny Anderson out of a little tiny Augustana College in Illinois. Those were really their 3 best quarterbacks in team history, and Boomer, Ken, and Burrow, based on what we've seen so far.
Andy Dalton was there for a while, but obviously, kind of a journeyman.
Red Rifle.
Yep. Red Rocket, isn't he? Is that
Red Rifle.
Oh, Red Rifle?
I think it's what they called it. I can't remember, but
that was the Red Rocket.
But Red Rocket is something that kids joke about when it comes to dogs.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Get your head out of the gutter, Big J.
Oh, man. But, moving on from that, you're going to go to their division rival there.
Did you want to go over their needs, though, for the draft?
Oh, yes. So, Cincinnati really does need to kind of bolster that offensive line, which they definitely have done so in the free agency. Getting Ali Marpet from the Buccaneers retired, but they got
Alex Kappa
from the Buccaneers. But they're also needing to get some safety work, corners, and even a tight end weapon. They got some great receivers out there, but getting another tight end out of the draft might be a good thing for Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. I really am. Like, I think Cincinnati could get even better on defense, and if they can just shore up their offensive line.
They have a chance to run it back. I mean, the AFC is definitely stout, but
AFC is stacked beyond belief right now.
Yeah,
I've never seen it I've never felt like it was this lopsided. Even the Cowboys 49ers heyday of the 90s, when it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that either one of them was going to win the Super Bowl.
Right.
I don't remember either conference being this stacked.
I mean, for years the NFC kind of trolled the AFC. They kind of ran through.
Ran roughshod, yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I think this is definitely much more of a stacked AFC than I've ever seen in my lifetime, at least. That's for sure.
The Patriots definitely would have had a rougher go of it if this was the kind of quarterback play that Brady had to. Not that Roethlisberger and any of those guys that challenge, and Peyton Manning.
I mean, because for the years in the AFC during that time for Tom Brady, it was it was always the Patriots, the Steelers, the Colts,
and the Broncos to a certain extent once Peyton moved.
Yeah.
So the next one we've got is, of course, the Steelers. That's a long list of good draft picks. I mean, you can pretty much talk about all their great teams in the 70s and just all the players they drafted. Bradshaw out of La Tech and Green out of North Texas, Lynn Swann out of USC, Troy Polamalu in the newer era out of USC, Ben Roethlisberger out of Miami of Ohio, Antonio Brown came out of Central Michigan. I mean, the Steelers, to me, have always been built on the draft. Always, always, always.
Yeah. The Steelers are like a class organization.
They are.
That's how you kind of develop it. Again, this is different, but 3 coaches over 50 years or something like that.
What have you got? Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and then Mike Tomlin. That's it.
Mike Tomlin, who's in his I think he's hitting the teens almost in his his tenure there, and he's never had a losing season. I mean, it's incredible.
Consistency, man.
But
It's
you
a
know,
big deal.
what needs do you have over there, CY,
For
the
Pittsburgh,
Steelers?
let's see what we got here. I mean, quarterback.
Quarterback obviously
Would be the first one.
I still definitely say I would love to see Baker in a Steelers uniform.
I would hate that because he's a Cleveland quarterback. Like, ew.
But I
Gross.
would love to see him in Pittsburgh. I just would.
That would be an interesting redemption story. But I mean, Mitch Trubisky isn't a bad option there by any means. I mean, I think there are teams that could unlock his potential if they can. I mean, if they can work with his skill set. But we'll see how things shake out. They need a quarterback, offensive line help. They probably need some wideout help after losing Juju, and safety and corner help. But we'll see how things roll. The next one's going to be the Browns, and speaking of Cleveland, and I mean they've had some stellar drafts, but it's been kind of spaced out. So you're talking Paul Warfield and Ozzie Newsome out of Ohio State and Alabama, respectively. Then you're talking about Joe Thomas from Wisconsin, who was on all those so wonderful teams.
But one of the greatest offensive linemen to play as well.
For sure. And then, of course, you got Jim Brown out of Syracuse in the 60s. And then Bernie Kosar, who was their quarterback in the 80s when he came out of Miami.
Right.
And was getting Cleveland to those AFC Championship games where the Broncos would just nick them.
Yep.
At the end with Elway. So, I mean, the Browns...
Or the Ernest Byer fumble.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. Which, speaking of, Ernest Biner was drafted to the Browns out of East Carolina years ago. But, Cleveland needs defensive tackle help, needs a little edge help this year. Potentially at wideout. They're a little bit thinner than they were last year. And then safety and linebacker. I mean, I think Cleveland has one of the better rosters in the league. And if this is a big if Deshaun is able to play the entire year, I'm not going to weigh in on the guilty, not guilty thing. At the end of the day, the suspension would be at the league's discretion, and of course the legal system has to work its way through the civil cases. Because I think all the criminal stuff was dropped, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So, I really think Cleveland could surprise a lot of people next year, but we'll see how it shakes out. The next one we have is the Ravens. They are a newer franchise, of course, to a certain degree since they moved from Cleveland. A lot of people still bitter about that back to Cleveland, but it is what it is. Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and Terrell Suggs out of Miami. And on Ray Lewis's point and Ed Reed's, both went to Miami. And then Terrell Suggs out of Arizona State.
Ed Reed was one of my favorite all-time safeties. I mean,
he was fantastic.
Fantastic.
But those three really laid the bedrock for the Ravens being a very defensive group.
Yeah.
And just being known for their dominant defense. Then, of course, you've got Lamar Jackson out of Louisville. That's their starting quarterback now. And then his predecessor, Joe Flacco, out of Delaware. They've nailed 2 drafts in a row in terms of their quarterbacks. In the context of Flacco and Jackson.
Well, yeah, in the context of Flacco taking him to the Super Bowl and obviously being a Super Bowl winning quarterback, but
he still had the run.
Tony
Romo doesn't have a Super Bowl ring. He was probably better than Flacco.
Probably, you're very right. And then they even had a great offensive lineman in Jonathan Ogden too, being
out of
UCLA.
UCLA. I remember that was one of their first draft picks, and then. Jamal Lewis out of Tennessee had that 2,000-yard season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
he had that game with like 231 yards or something like that rushing, NFL record or something like that.
So then, they need a center, cornerbacks, defensive tackle, potentially an edge and wideout. And we'll just have to see. I still think...
obviously, losing out on Zadarius Smith
that
and
hurts.
the whole free agency thing, they thought they were going to shore up that edge rush, and so now they're going to probably have to go through the draft and for that. But like you were saying, I think you were getting ready to say, I just think that they need a little bit more offensive firepower too. I think they rely a little bit too much on Lamar Jackson, and not really sure Marquise Brown is necessarily the answer at wideout.
What's funny is I actually think that Hollywood Brown would actually be a better fit in the slot. Yeah. If they would just let him, because I think Bateman on the outside. I think Bateman on the outside makes a lot of sense, but I think him in the slot, he'd burn a lot of nickels, and he would blow the top off.
You can move him in the motion game. You can do jet sweeps. Use him a little bit like Debo,
or like Tyreek in a way.
In a way, yeah, exactly. Get him out into space. Get him quick balls out into space.
Absolutely. Next one we've got is the Titans. Fairly new franchise, of course, since they moved from Houston in the '90s, and it's just real straightforward for me. The 3 players that I think of when I think of the Titans are Steve McNair out of tiny Alcorn State,
Blazing
Rest
fast,
in-
Chris Johnson.
and then Earl Campbell when they were in
Yep.
Houston as the Oilers when he came out of Texas after his Heisman year. I mean, Earl's got some of the most iconic highlights in NFL history.
Yeah.
His career was just cut short because of the bruising way that he played, and just got cut short because of injuries.
And you know,
So-
a name that most people probably aren't familiar with, you know, then this is dating back to the Houston Oilers here, but back in the 1969 draft, a gentleman by the name of Ken Houston, one of the best late round steals in the AFL era, just because he was a 9th round pick, selected to 12 Pro Bowl selections, and 9 touchdowns off of interceptions. Kind of cemented his status in the Hall of Fame. So
Wow, that's awesome. I did not know that. The next one, that was a really good factoid there, Big J. The next one we've got is the Jaguars, of course, newer franchise. The Jags have struggled in a lot of respects. I remember loving watching them in the mid-'90s when they first came in, mid to late 90s with Brunell and Smith and Fred Taylor. I mean, at the end of the day, Jacksonville had a really solid roster there for a while, and that was kind of supplemented by choosing Tony Baselli at offensive line out of USC. Tony Brackens out of Texas at D end, shored up their defensive line. And, you know, Fred Taylor out of Florida, as I mentioned prior, was a solid running back, solid as a rock. And then you had Maurice Jones-Drew out of UCLA kind of take up the mantle from Fred Taylor after that. And unfortunately, he had to be traded to the Rams. But the pickup of Jalen Ramsey was a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, an outstanding draft pick by the Jags.
Yeah, for sure.
But for this year, I mean, they need help everywhere. It's really that simple. Even though they brought in Christian Kirk, they've got Trevor Lawrence there. I think they need help everywhere. It says offensive tackle, edge, wide receiver, safety, and linebacker. To me, that literally means that the entire roster needs help.
I mean, it's going to be interesting with the first overall pick that they got. They have their pick of the litter, so to speak. And honestly, I don't know. I mean, with as much stuff that they need, I feel like that they just, traded down, hoarded some picks. And what you just said, offensive tackle and edge rushing is kind of the two main needs that they need. It's kind of, this draft class is a little bit deep in that regard, at least in the edge rushers, maybe not so much as those stout offensive linemen. So I can see them definitely drafting the offensive lineman, maybe first overall, or like I said, trading back, picking up a couple more, getting a hoard.
If it's me, I trade back into almost the teens if I can find a taker that's really looking for that franchise offensive tackle. They think they found him in Evan Neal out of Alabama, or if they're looking for Kayvon Thibodeau or Aiden Hutchinson out of Michigan. I would trade down if I were the Jags GM. I really would. I would try to get a couple more picks in the first round this year or potentially next year.
Yeah.
It just depends on what price teams are willing to pay to get in that first slot,
which is going to be a very hefty price.
Maybe not as high as
if you're trading down to the teens. If the team's trying to go from the teens up to the first pick, it's going to be a very hefty price to pay.
You would think. The next one we've got is the Colts. Amazing quarterbacks on this list.
Yep.
I mean, you've got Andrew Luck out of Stanford and technically John Elway out of Stanford.
Technically John Elway.
Technically, even though he got traded to Denver. And then you've also got, Peyton Manning out of Tennessee. You've got Edgerrin James out of Miami. Reggie Wayne out of Miami. Marvin Harrison out of Syracuse. And then John Mackey out of Syracuse. So the Colts have definitely had some fantastic draft picks over the years. What were you going to toss in? Maybe Johnny U?
Yeah, a fun one for me is, going back, this is pre-AFL-NFL merger here back in 1955. Johnny Unitas coming out of Louisville.
Louisville, yeah.
He was a 9th-round pick, selected 102nd overall. So it's kind of crazy that, a player of that stature, this is back when the Colts were
But he was drafted by the
Baltimore,
Steelers,
too.
right?
He was drafted by the Steelers at that time, and then obviously was traded at some point to the Baltimore Colts. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, speaking of the AFC South, the next team we got is the Texans. This is really straightforward for me. J.J. Watt from Wisconsin, DeAndre Hopkins from Clemson, and Andre Johnson from Miami.
Yep.
Those are the 3 best players they have ever drafted.
Yeah.
That is
no
short.
David Carr.
Moving right along. He didn't have any protection.
He had no chance. Poor guy.
But I mean,
first overall pick
dude,
in their expansion year.
This is the 20th anniversary of the Texans coming into the league.
Yeah.
We're getting old.
Isn't that crazy?
That's nuts. For this year, I would say that Houston just needs a ton of help. I mean, obviously they got the Watson trade done, so they've got a little bit more capital to work with.
Yeah.
But it's just a bad roster. I mean, they need help everywhere. I don't think it's even worth going into more of a deep dive. They need help everywhere.
So moving on, we got the Chiefs in Kansas City coming up next, and they got some great players over the years. You know, Jamal Charles, running back out of Texas. Priest Holmes, another running back out of the University of Texas. And, you know, Travis Kelce, more recently, out of
At
Cincy.
tight end, yeah.
Yeah.
There's some older guys in there like Buck Buchanan out of Grambling,
Right.
and Willie Lanier out of Morgan State, and Bobby Bell out of Minnesota.
Go-
That was when the Chiefs really got their AFL heyday started on the defensive side.
They sure did. And then you can even go pre-Travis Kelce, or like the Travis Kelce before Travis Kelce, and Tony Gonzalez
Yep.
out of Cal. So you also can't forget Derek Thomas, the late great Derek Thomas out of
Alabama.
Alabama. And then obviously more recently, Patrick Mahomes could be
Out of Texas Tech.
added to that list too. For Sure.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that I've always liked the Chiefs. I just never knew if the Chiefs were going to get over the hump. And having Hill and Kelsey and Mahomes and Andy Reid's offensive genius has done that.
Mhm.
You wonder how much things are going to change with Tyreek not there. But I almost
I
wonder
don't
if
think
that.
much is gonna.
I almost wonder if Mecole Hardman's going to take up a bigger role now that he's been in the offense for a couple of years. He has a similar skill set to Tyreek. But we'll see. Maybe they find a speedster in the draft
I
to
think-
kind of replicate what Tyreek did for them, even though Tyreek's unique.
Yeah, Tyreek's definitely unique, and trying to fill that void is going to be big. And like you said, Michael Hardman does provide that speed as well. But I think they're going to rely more on Patrick Mahomes than anything. I think they're going to need to just spread the ball around. It's going to be more of a scheme thing rather than just go deep all the time, you know?
We'll see. I'm definitely curious to see how things shake out there. The next one we've got is the Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Oakland, Los Angeles. They've gone back and forth so many times. Now, Las Vegas Raiders. And all I can say is wow. I mean, you're Marcus Allen out of USC, Ken Stabler out of Alabama, Fred Biletnikoff, who the freaking collegiate wide receiver, best receiver award is named
Yep.
after, out of Florida State, Charles Woodson out of Michigan, Tim Brown out of Notre Dame.
And
Those are
can't
all
forget
household names.
Can't forget the great Howie Long out of Villanova.
Yeah, was Howie really that great?
I mean, he was. He was the mainstream of his time, and obviously, even to today's generation, he's still household name, being an analyst
very
on
true.
NFL or on Fox. So you know, that's the thing is the Raiders definitely have a long history of some great players in their come through their building. But what do they need? What do they need? They got a great
Stuff.
receiver.
Yeah, they picked up Devontae
They got a
Adams.
great receiver this year.
Well, that definitely addressed that need. They still need some help on the offensive line, and their defense needs help at all three levels.
Yeah, all three. It looks like they need a DT, a linebacker, and a safety in that area.
Yeah, they only have one top 100 pick,
Oof.
86th overall.
Be kind of hard to get all your needs done throughout the draft, but we'll see what they can do. I mean, a lot of these big name players, some of them come later in the draft anyway, so we'll see what happens.
We shall. The next one we've got is the Los Angeles San Diego. I'm just gonna say the Chargers. I still don't love it that they're in LA. They should be in San Diego, but that's beside the point.
Saint Diego.
But my goodness gracious, they need help on the offensive line. They need to be able to stop the run more effectively on defense. Period.
100%. Defense,
But
linebackers, they need help for sure.
And the crazy thing is they got Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack on the D line now.
And with the possible healthy, who's the safety out
Talking about
over
Derwin
there?
James?
Derwin James, with the healthy Derwin James, who's a great player. But, you know, speaking of great players, the Chargers have some really good players throughout their history. And LaDainian Tomlinson coming out of Texas' own TCU. Drew Brees out of Purdue. Granted, he didn't have the longest stint there, but it was a
Still
great
drafted,
draft.
and he was a fantastic player.
Phillip Rivers and Antonio Gates. Phillip Rivers out of NC State and Antonio Gates out of Kent State. There's Kent State again for you. And then you can even go back even throughout the 70s with Dan Fouts out of Oregon.
Yep, and then of course Junior Seau out of USC.
Yeah, the late great Junior
I mean, he was the Chargers for so long.
He really was. He was the face of that team for many years.
And then the last AFC West team we had was the Broncos, and Von Miller out of A&M, Demaryius Thomas out of Georgia Tech, Terrell Davis out of Georgia, Shannon Sharp out of Savannah State, and then Steve Atwater out of Arkansas. I mean, they've got some really recognizable names, and I think, didn't you have Shannon Sharp on there as one of your, and Terrell Davis
I had
on
both
there?
of them, yeah. Terrell Davis and Shannon Sharp can be considered some of the best late draft steals of all time. You know, Terrell Davis, coming out of Georgia, was the 6th round pick in the 1995 draft. And, I mean, his run from 95 to 98 before those real bad injuries and so forth.
Fantastic.
Great. I mean, he was averaging about 1,600 yards per year, which is incredible. And then, you know, Shannon Sharp, who's arguably, you can definitely argue one of the greatest tight ends of all time, was a 7th round pick in the 1990 draft. And, you know, it's even funnier for him because he wasn't even the more famous Sharp. You know, his older brother, Sterling, was definitely more famous, definitely more touted coming out of college. And Shannon ended up, you know, only snagging 815 passes, making the Hall of Fame in 2011 as one of those kind of first tweener positions where he was too big to be a receiver, but not your general tight end size for that time in the 90s. And he had a great run. 3 Super Bowl wins, 2 with Denver and 1 with Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, just can't knock it. Cannot knock it. We're going to switch over to the Broncos' needs in this draft, and getting Russell Wilson's big.
Very big.
But they still need a new right tackle. They need some help on the edge now with Von Miller gone after they traded him to L.A., and then, of course, now he's signed in Buffalo. And then they really could use some help at corner, tight end, and to a degree at running back.
Well,
I love the fact that
re-signed
they
Gordon.
just re-signed Gordon, and you got Williams there. I mean, I'm drafting Williams if I can in our fantasy drafts. I think he's going to go off with Russell Wilson in that offense, even more so than he did last year.
It'll be interesting to see.
Because they've got some receivers with Judy and Patrick and who's the other cat? Sutton. If they can stay healthy, that Denver offense could surprise some people.
Yeah, they got rid of their tight end there in Noah Fant, so obviously that's one of the needs that they need in this draft. But Russell Wilson is definitely the biggest addition for Denver, and that's going to definitely do some good stuff.
Next one, we're actually going to be switching over to the NFC at this point. So, Big J, it's going to be on point with you to kind of go over their draft stuff, specifically in terms of needs and what to expect in the draft. The Cowboys have had a really solid draft history overall. There's obviously the before Jerry Jones era and the after when Jerry bought the team in the late 80s. But even still, I mean, Tyron Smith out of USC, Tony Dorsett out of Pitt, DeMarcus Ware out of Troy, Randy White out of Maryland, Bob Lilly, the first draft pick of the team's history out of TCU.
Mr. Cowboy himself.
I mean, Emmitt Smith out of Florida, Michael Irvin out of Miami, Troy Aikman out of UCLA, Roger Staubach out of Navy, Zach Martin out of Notre Dame. I mean, there's just a lot of, and not just because we live in Dallas and not because I grew up a Cowboys fan, those are big names.
Definitely.
And those are all drafted. Those are all homegrown guys.
I mean, Jerry likes to tout that, so much so that he didn't hardly do anything in the offseason this year. But one of those fun things, a little fun fact, was Roger Staubach. Back in 1964, he was a 10th round draft pick.
Because he had to serve.
Because he went to
and he was a Heisman winner.
A Heisman winner. And, obviously he came back from service and led the Cowboys to multiple runs. So.
Yep.
But as far as what they need in this year's draft, they do need some help on that offensive line at the interior position. Obviously losing some key players there. Zach Martin.
Connor Williams and La'el Collins moving on.
With the age of, Zach Martin and so forth. Needing some help at receiver. I mean, you lost
losing
Cooper
and Cedric Wilson.
Yep. And then obviously some edge rushers because
Randy Gregory.
The whole drama there. Linebacker. I mean, Micah Parsons and Wolf Hunter kind of can take that up, but I mean, you definitely need a stout linebacker in that division.
You need a little bit of backup, if you will.
But that's the thing is, and another one here that I really like to bring out is in 1967 they had a 7th round pick in Rayfield Wright.
Offensive lineman.
I mean, 6 Pro Bowls and a Hall of Fame induction says that I think that was a great steal.
Yeah, you could say that. The next one that we've got on this list is the New York Giants. a little bit shorter list than I realized, just in terms of like impact guys that they've drafted per se in some respects. But it's hard to knock it when you've got Lawrence Taylor out of UNC, Phil Simms from Morehead State, Tom Landry, who went to Texas but was on those defenses very, very early on.
The 40s, I think.
Frank Gifford out of USC, Michael Strahan out of Texas Southern, and then, of course, Eli Manning out of Ole Miss. I mean, nothing to sneeze at.
Maybe not
4
the
Super Bowls.
better of the Manning brother, but
Still won two
still
Super
won
Bowls.
2 Super Bowls.
Just
over
like
the
Peyton
greatest
did.
teams. And let's see. So we're talking about the Giants here. Let's go down. Where are they at?
It should be in the ends.
Yeah. For this draft coming up, they're needing some help at the linebacker position and a little bit on that secondary and the safety position. But, I mean, overall, their offensive line is just riddled. They need an offensive
Revamp.
lineman at every position on the offensive line, especially if they're going to want to try to run it back with Daniel Jones. They might even go quarterback in this year's draft. We don't know.
Who knows? The Giants are a wild card for sure. The next one we've got, I'm not putting their name on here. It's just Washington.
I mean, they're the Redskins. They will always be the Redskins, but I get it. So they are also the Commanders.
They're also the Washington football team.
It could have been the Generals. I think the Generals would have been.
I would have preferred Sentinels.
Sentinels. Yeah, definitely going back to.
Truth be
the
told,
movie.
if it would have been Washington Generals, I would have been fine with that, actually.
Yeah.
I thought it would have been very appropriate considering, DC
I think Generals
and the
is better
freaking
than
Pentagon.
Commanders
They could be they
anyways.
could have been the Washington Pentagons.
Oh Lord.
Or they could have been the Washington Monuments.
Hey, they could have been the. Have a giant phallic symbol on their helmet. I think that would be great.
Would they have 2 bushes at the bottom?
And we're not talking about George and George Senior.
No, the one that you put in the yard.
Oh Lord.
I'm just trying to think though. What was our catchphrase that we kind of claimed? Something about something hotel, or the something motel.
Oh yes. Oh, it's gonna come back to me in a minute, but
We'll have to go back,
I'll
but we have
I'll
to keep
think
going.
about that. But I'm gonna keep going here because Washington has had some pretty good players over their history. The great Sammy Baugh out of TCU, Daryl Green out of Texas A&M, Kingsville, and then even the late great Sean Taylor out of Miami, another Miami player, and then Charlie Taylor out of Arizona State too.
Great wideout for years
Yeah.
for Washington. And, what do they need? Everything.
You could say that. I mean, they did just get Carson Wentz, but obviously we still need a future franchise quarterback over there. They need help at receiver, and definitely they got studs all over that defensive line, but I think everywhere else they need help. And then a tight end too. Like I said, you need to get a quarterback and give them some weapons to work with.
McLaurin's solid as a rock, but he's trying to get a contract extension.
Mm-hmm.
Can't blame him.
But moving on, we got the Philadelphia Eagles coming up, and they've had some really good players over the years as well. One of the best safeties that I can remember watching growing up was Brian Dawkins out of Clemson, and then you got Chuck Bednarik out of Penn, which obviously the college trophy's named after.
Mm-hmm.
The Minister of Defense himself, Reggie White,
Out of Tennessee, yep.
And then you can go back to, even Deshaun Jackson out of Cal, Donovan McNabb out of Syracuse, and then the quarterback Steve Van Buren out of LSU from back in the heyday.
I believe it was in the 40s.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
And what have you got for the Eagles in terms of what they need other than,
A lot of things. Pretty much everywhere on the defensive side, I think they can't go wrong. They need
corner,
some
linebacker,
corners.
and safety and edge rusher?
Yep, and then obviously some receivers to kind of fill in, give Jalen Hurts some more, offensive firepower.
It'll be interesting. I'm curious to see what happens in Philly because I think Hurts has a lot of potential. He's a winner. I really, really like Jalen Hurts. Always have.
He does have that potential. You gotta surround him with the right parts and things of that nature. And they made that
Run
trade with
the
the
football.
Saints. I mean, they made that
Run the
trade with the
football.
Saints where they traded down. They amassed some more picks. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the draft as well. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers, who have a litany of great Hall of Famers coming out of there.
Yeah, we need to kind
franchise.
of retrograde this list to a certain extent. No, I mean, you're talking from the old school. You're talking Forrest Gregg from SMU, Bart Starr out of Alabama, Which wasn't he like a 15th round pick or something like that?
He was. Let me take a look here because I got that written right here. Yeah, he was a 17th round pick in the 1956 draft.
That's
Selected
crazy.
200th overall.
That's nuts. So
Insane.
now keep in mind there were a lot less teams in the league in those days, so you probably
Right.
needed more of the rounds of the draft for that reason. So then you've got Paul Hornung out of Notre Dame, who was an exceptional player. Jim Taylor out of LSU, another great player. You had Sterling Sharp, who got his career cut short, unfortunately, but out of South Carolina. Aaron Rodgers, of course, out of Cal.
And another guy on here that I have on my list for some of the greatest steals of all time in Donald Driver. Picked up in the 99 draft, 7th round.
Out of Alcorn State.
Yep. He got himself a Super Bowl ring. He had a 13-year career. I mean, that's a straight consistency.
He was fantastic.
And he had 7,000-yard seasons to his name.
He was a fantastic
he was
player.
a great receiver.
The Packers need some stuff.
Yeah, they need some more receivers. Obviously, losing Devontae Adams is going to be a big deal. They do need some offensive line help. And then mainly on the defensive side at all three levels. They need an edge rusher, linebackers, and safeties in that area, especially because of their free agency woes. They've lost some players.
Yeah, we'll see how things go in that context. The Lions are up next. And Detroit has drafted guys like Matthew Stafford out of Georgia, who just won his first Super Bowl with the Rams. Calvin Johnson out of Georgia Tech, who retired early. Barry Sanders out of Oklahoma State, one of the best running backs of all time, who retired early. Billy Sims out of Oklahoma. Herman Moore out of Virginia. I mean, they've had some solid players come through Detroit. It's just, I want the Lions to win a Super Bowl before I die.
It would be cool to see that. I mean, I still think the Bobby Lane, curse is still pretty active in Detroit. But Detroit definitely needs some help. Again, they need a quarterback. I mean, they got Jared Goff in that trade with Matthew Stafford, and not really sure he's the long-term deal there. But
I think he's going to be a backup quarterback for the rest of his career once he leaves Detroit.
Once he leaves Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, they need some help at receiver as well. They got some young, nice receivers coming out right now, but they can always use the help. And then, obviously, anywhere on that offensive line and the secondary and the defense, which, a lot of people think that they might take Sauce Gardner. I think that third overall pick in this year's draft. So
if Hutchinson drops to them, they have to take him.
they have to take him.
They have to. Local kid from Michigan. That'd be a really good thing for them. The Bears are up next. And, you're talking Mike Singletary out of Baylor. You're talking Lance Briggs out of Arizona. You're talking
put that whole 85 defense on this
No
list.
kidding. You're talking Richard Dent out of Tennessee State. Brian Urlacher.
Speaking of Richard Dent, man, 8th round in the 1983 draft. He was a fantastic player for that 85
on
defense.
the D-line.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. He was a fantastic player, period. And then, of course, the great late Walter Payton out of Jackson State.
Yep.
Fantastic. Probably the best running back of all time, along with Barry and Emmett.
It's one of those things I want to go back to Richard Dent real quick because he posted 12 and a half sacks in the season in which he was a 33-year-old rusher in 1993.
Wow.
12 and a half sacks. He has 137 and a half sacks for his whole career.
Wow.
Really good player. But speaking of the Bears, we got some issues as far as what they need moving forward with
They
this
don't need
year's
a quarterback
draft.
in this draft.
They don't, but they do need offensive line help, especially at the edges. They need some receivers and an edge rusher. I mean, they lost Khalil. They didn't really have Khalil Mack last year, but they definitely need some help on the offensive and defensive lines for sure. Keep those players fighting in the trenches. And then moving on, we got the Minnesota Vikings up next.
Vikings.
The Vikings have a good history with some good draft picks, especially when you're talking about Adrian Peterson out of Oklahoma, Randy Moss out of Marshall, and then you even got more recently Stephon Diggs out of Maryland and Dalvin Cook out of FSU.
And Justin Jefferson out of LSU.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking old school, you're talking Alan Page and Carl Eller and Fran Tarkenton too. I mean, out of Notre Dame, Minnesota, and Georgia, respectively.
See why I can't believe you don't even have Chris Carter on this list.
Chris Carter wasn't drafted by the Vikings. He was drafted by the Eagles.
He was. You're right. And the whole Buddy Ryan issue in the Eagles. Yes, you're right.
I think he was. I'll double check that while you're going through what are their needs.
Let's see here. We're looking at the Vikings here. Pretty much same thing as a lot of these teams. A lot of secondary help, a lot of receiver help, and interior offensive line. That's the thing is they need some people to be able to block, create drives, especially for that running game with Dalvin Cook over there. And that's just the big thing is they got to figure out how to run the ball efficiently.
Yes, they do. And to confirm, Carter was drafted in the 4th round by the Eagles in the '87 supplemental draft.
Okay. So, I mean, 4th round, that's not nothing to scoff at there.
No, not at all. And
He was
Chris
a great
Carter was
player.
fantastic.
Some of
for
the best
so
hands
long.
in the game.
Yes.
And then we're going to move on to the Arizona Cardinals. They're not a long-term franchise in the NFL. They're more of
Well, actually, the
Well, they-
Cardinals have been around as a
a
franchise, for a long
for
time.
a long time.
In terms of being in Arizona, they have not been there too terribly long.
Yeah, I think they were like the Chicago Cardinals at one point. Weren't
they were. And in one of the historical episodes that we've done, we went and dug deep into their history. Chicago Cardinals, like St. Louis Cardinals,
Yep.
and now, of course, the
Arizona.
Well, first it was Phoenix Cardinals, and then it was the Arizona Cardinals.
But they've had a good history. Obviously a few LSU players and Patrick Peterson and Tyrann Mathieu.
Honey Badger don't care.
Honey Badger don't care. Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitz. Larry Fitz out of Pitt, Anquan Bolden out of FSU. Some great receivers that were long-term standouts.
Staples in that offense. And then Simeon Rice.
Simeon Rice, a great Buccaneer player who won the Super Bowl with us. And then Calais Campbell out of Miami.
Calais Campbell is still going strong.
He is. He's a big man.
And then, did you want to pop into the Cardinals' little box of tricks to figure out what they need to stop another late season slide?
They're needing
Mental
offensive-
fortitude.
Yeah, they're needing mental
Maturity
from that quarterback position there. But they also have needs at the offensive and defensive lines, especially the interior and outside edge rush. And then it could always use a little bit of help with the receiver position. They just lost what's his name to Jacksonville actually, wasn't it?
Christian Kirk.
Yep. And then some corner help as well over there. So, a lot of these teams, you can never have too many receivers or corners, secondary players in the NFL, especially the way the NFL is nowadays. So you're going to see that pretty much across the board when it comes to the draft needs.
Mm-hmm.
But going to Seattle now, in the Seahawks, in their history, they had a great player out of the University of Texas in Earl Thomas. Obviously, Russell Wilson out of Wisconsin, who is now with the Denver Broncos.
Correct.
And then you even have Cortez Kennedy out of Miami, Richard Sherman out of Stanford, Cam Chancellor out of Virginia Tech, and
Kevin Mawai
out of LSU. And they've had, some great drafts as far as the defensive side, and I feel like they need to continue that trend, especially with what's going on in Seattle right now. They obviously need a quarterback. Drew Lock being there with the trade from Denver. Not really sure how Seattle feels about him. Obviously, they feel pretty confident in him. They didn't make any other splashes or anything like that, but probably going to drop the quarterback to back him up, maybe take the reins. Definitely needing some offensive line, defensive line help, and then obviously, again, talk about that secondary and the corner position.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Seattle, especially now that the Russell Wilson era is done. But next one we've got is the Super Bowl champs, the Buck Whoopers, the Rams.
Oh, the Buck Whoopers. I see.
Don't you see that Cooper Kupp catch in the fourth quarter in your dreams?
Oh God, it was a nightmare.
Speaking of great players that they've drafted.
Yep, Cooper Kupp out of Eastern Washington. That freaking bruiser of a running back, Steven Jackson out of Oregon State.
He was fantastic in St. Louis.
He was. He really did do great. I mean, and you can go back to the greatest show on turf with Isaac Bruce
And Torrey Holt. And Orlando Pace, for that matter.
Great offensive lineman. His son is now playing in the league, isn't it? Orlando Pace Jr.?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I thought he was. But that's the thing is, the Rams, for the most part, they kind of went all in this year. Obviously won the Super Bowl, but they're still needing some help. They lost Von Miller, so they need those edge rushers.
With what draft picks?
Yeah, that's the truth. They don't have anything on night one, that's for sure. So Thursday night, they're not going to have anything to do on that, which is like a third year in a row or something of that nature. But they're going to still need help with the linebacker, secondary positions, cornerbacks, and safety. And then with Andrew Whitworth retiring, obviously fill the void at tackle, some guard issues on the offensive line as well. But really just depends on how well they're going to be able to do with all of their contracts and moving that money around.
Yep. We'll see. I'm curious to see what the Rams do for an encore. I mean, they've still got Aaron Donald. They've still got Cooper Kupp. They've still got Matthew Stafford. and they still got Jalen Ramsey. I mean, they've been really good at piecing together the roster to support these stars.
Yeah, for
to give them credit. The next one we've got is a team in turmoil to a certain extent. They're trying to get rid of Jimmy G, and Deebo Samuel just asked for a trade. I mean, it's just what's going on in San Fran to me is very weird. But you've got,
speaking of Deebo, they drafted him out of South Carolina. He has turned out to be a very good draft pick, but obviously he's not going to have a long tenure in San Francisco.
Well, we'll see how things shake out. I'm not going to write anything off, but they also drafted George Kittle, their tight end out of Iowa. Patrick Willis was amazing at linebacker for a long time.
Linebacker.
Terrell Owens out of Chattanooga. Charles Haley, a great defensive end out of James Madison, had a great career, won 5 Super Bowls. Jerry Rice, of course, out of Mississippi Valley State. Ronnie Lott out of USC. Joe Montana in the 3rd round out of Notre Dame. And then Lance Allworth out of Arkansas.
Yeah. The Joe Montana thing kind of surprised me a little bit, thinking about it, being a 3rd round draft pick in that 79 draft. He was selected 82nd overall for the Fighting Irish. So.
Yep. I mean, it's fascinating, but you can do the next one just because I want to get a good laugh in.
Well, the 49ers are still in need. Obviously, if they're going to be getting rid of Deebo, they're going to need someone to replace him at receiver. They're needing some help on that defensive tackle. They got, obviously, Nick Bosa out there on the edge. And then, obviously, some secondary help, some interior offensive line help, especially the way Kyle Shanahan likes to run his offense.
Yeah.
You need some big bruisers, some agile players on the offensive line.
We'll see how it shakes out for them.
But to get to the next good team here, the Tampa Bay Bucks.
Good is relative.
Good is very relative because they are one of the contenders coming out of the NFC this year. But, we go back to some of their greatest draft picks. You can pretty much chalk it up to a lot of that, players that's attributed to the 2000 Super Bowl that we had, the 2002 Super Bowl that we had, in Mike Allstott, Derek Brooks out of FSU, Warren Sapp out of Miami, Rondé Barber out of Virginia, John Lynch as well can be named in there. A fun one that CY had to put on here just to troll me a little bit with was Steve Young out of BYU, who never played, or who he did play for us, but we ended up trading him out and
to San
Fran, and the history is written the rest of the way for him. But the Bucks have some definite needs as well. Obviously, before the Brady retirement, then unretirement, we were going to need a quarterback. However, we still need a lot of help in that offensive interior lineman. Losing Ali Marpet to retirement, and then obviously Alex Kappa to the Bengals. We brought in Shaq Mason, which can kind of fill that void, but we still need help in the offensive line, defensive line to help. With Vita Vea on that defensive tackle position, we need some edge rushers. And then obviously we lost the safety in Jordan Whitehead and some corners, so we're going to need some secondary help in that division as well.
Speaking of teams that need some help, Atlanta. They haven't had the best draft history. I mean, they've got Matt Ryan out of BC, Julio Jones out of Bama, Deion Sanders out of FSU, and then their first draft pick ever was Tommy Nobis, a defensive tackle out of Texas. Other than that,
kind of blah. I mean, Julio Jones is a great one out of Alabama. Deion Sanders obviously was a great one too, but Matt Ryan, I mean, that's the thing is you see, like, they don't really stay with the team too long here. I mean, Matt Ryan took them to the Super Bowl and obviously had that horrible 28-3 meltdown.
That wasn't his fault as much as it was the
coaching.
fact that they didn't run the football.
It was coaching more than anything.
Though, didn't he go to Indy?
He did. He is now in Indy for his first season starting up this year.
Curious to see how that'll work.
I think it'll be pretty good. I think it's going to be better than Carson Wentz's experience over there in Indy.
Reich knows how to get the best out of his quarterbacks.
Right. And speaking of as far as what they need over in Atlanta, I mean, they don't really have it on here based on Pro Football Network, but I still think Marcus Mariota is not the answer at quarterback, so I think they still definitely need something in the quarterback position.
I'd be really happy if they got a renaissance year out of him, though, man.
Oh, Atlanta I like Marcus Mariota to obviously root for him to have a good year, but you got to be real with it. I think Atlanta needs receivers and both defensive line. Anywhere on that offensive defensive line they can get. They had one of the worst offensive lines in the league last year.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you there, but I mean, then you look to the next team. I mean, the South, the NFC South is in real turmoil right now, considering where they were a couple years ago. With the Bucks having Jameis, the Falcons having Matt Ryan, the Panthers having Cam Newton, and the Saints having Drew Brees.
It has fallen
Now
off a cliff.
it's fallen off a cliff in terms of quarterback quality.
I mean, if Tom Brady wouldn't have come back, we would
the
be
NFC South would be terrible.
Kyle Trask. I mean, the
it would have been
quarterbacks,
terrible.
It would have
So,
been miserable.
With the Panthers, Cam Newton, one of their better draft picks of all time. Cam isn't what he once was physically based on what we've seen out of Auburn. Jonathan Stewart out of Oregon at running back was fantastic with, D'Angelo Williams out of Memphis, kind of doing that tag team. They were fantastic to watch. And then, of course, Steve Smith and then Julius Peppers out of UNC.
Luke Kuechly
out
was
of
one of the best linebacker prospects, unfortunately.
And Thomas Davis out of Georgia was fantastic, too, for a long time.
Yeah.
I think he's still – or did he retire recently? I forget.
I think he retired. I think he just retired very recently. But, Carolina obviously needs quarterback help. They need offensive line.
What are you talking about? They got Sam Darnold.
So they definitely need quarterback help. And like I said, they need offensive
Sam,
line
nothing
there.
personal.
Carolina's defense is still pretty good, though. They have a decent defense going on over there right now. They just really need to vamp that offensive firepower and trenches. But, we're going to end it out here in with the New Orleans Saints and the NFC South. And some of their great players of past, would be the man that spawned two of the greatest quarterbacks in the NFL history.
Spawned, that's a word.
Archie Manning out of Ole Miss, obviously with the Aints back in the day. And then you got, more recently with Alvin Kamara out of Tennessee. Marcus Colston was a very good player for them out of Hofstra. And then obviously Michael Thomas out of Ohio
I hope
State.
I hope he gets back on track because I loved watching Michael Thomas in his pomp.
Yeah, they definitely do. It would be nice. It would be nice to see him back. I mean, for me saying that, no, not really, but
well, as a Bucks fan, of course, but
and also the Deuce McAllister. I loved watching him. He was a great.
Deuce was loose.
Deuce was loose out of Ole Miss.
You're not just talking about when you're in the bathroom.
Oh my goodness! But the Saints need some help, obviously.
With what draft picks?
That's the thing. They don't really have much, but we're gonna see what they can do. I mean, obviously, quarterback with Jameis Winston coming back, thinking they can rely on him for another year.
I think he's going to be better than people expect.
Oh, I definitely.
He was solid last year.
He was having a good little trending upward motion, before the injury. But offensive tackle because they lost
Armstead to Miami. Yep.
And then they need some more receiver help. They might need a running back depending on whatever goes on with Alvin Kamara.
I have not heard a peep.
I haven't heard anything either. And then, obviously, offensive line, and then that secondary. They got a great defense right now in New Orleans, but you can always add depth.
For sure. And then I think you were wanting to kind of go over the biggest busts in NFL history just based off of just some things that we've read, and that list is a doozy.
Some of this stuff kind of gets fun, guys. So that's going to round out, all 32 teams as far as draft needs out of this year's draft, and then just giving you the history lesson as far as some of their greatest draft picks of their legacies. And we want to end on a little bit of a light note here with some of these biggest busts of all time. And
are you talking about the busts in Canton?
Not the busts in Canton, not those gold or bronze beautiful little creations of these people's heads that just sit there and talk to each other overnight when there's no one around in the hall.
You've confirmed this.
I have. I've witnessed it.
You've never been to Canton, Ohio?
I have not. I would love to go one day. But I think if you're gonna talk busts, you got to start with probably
Pamela
the number
Anderson.
one of all time.
Well, you said you're talking about busts.
We're not talking about that kind of bust, though. So, we're not going to talk about that kind of bust. We're talking about the quarterback bust in Ryan Leaf being drafted second overall behind Peyton Manning in the 1998 draft to the San Diego Chargers.
I think the leaf that was sprouting ended up coming out in the cold dead of winter, so it didn't really get a chance to flower.
It wilted before it ever sprouted.
There is a joke in there, but I am just going to leave it alone.
But, that's the thing is, you think about busts, they're players that have been highly touted throughout their college career or coming out of the draft from the combine.
And you think they'll be able to handle it.
And you're going to think that they're going to be able to, take on your team, be the face of your franchise. And Ryan Leaf was definitely one of those that just fell flat for the Chargers back in 98. I mean, he left at a 4-14 record in 18 starts for the club, with an overall 48.8 passer rating.
Lovely.
Not good at all.
Wonder if we can find Ryan Leaf highlights on YouTube.
And you know the worst thing about it all is that the Chargers actually traded up to get him, and in doing so, they traded the Cardinals a second rounder, an additional first rounder for the '99 draft, and 2 veteran players at the time, in Eric Metcalf and Patrick Sapp. So you could argue that they went out of their way to make that, to have that as be a big bust for them. Another one that you can go back to is that 1989 season when the Cowboys got their great Hall of Fame quarterback in Troy Aikman, the first pick overall. But the Packers kind of missed in this second overall pick with offensive lineman Tony Manderick. You know, Sports Illustrated kind of deemed him as the incredible bulk on the cover prior to this draft. You know, he had uncommon athleticism and size for the position at the time, but only 3 years later, he was labeled the incredible bust. So, just kind of funny there. But, you know, it's one of those things that you can think that Troy Aikman went number 1. The Packers passed on Barry Sanders, Derek Thomas, and Deion Sanders that were taken in the next consecutive picks that draft. So you could just imagine what they could have had. Another one that we definitely have on this list is DeMarcus Russell, first overall pick in 2007.
Out of LSU.
Out of LSU. I mean, he had one of the best pro days, combine deals that you probably had ever seen out of a quarterback up until that time. But he began his career with a lengthy holdout and never really fulfilled that hype that he generated. I mean, he gained weight. I mean, obviously the famous where the coaches gave him a tape going over blitz packages and then asked him the next day, you know, if he watched it, so forth and so on. And in reality, it was a blank tape altogether. So, and he tried to sit there and say, like, he watched it, he saw this, and that, and he explained that he, you know, this and that. But kind of just a funny thing. But Oakland could have taken, you know, who they could have had? You could have had Megatron, you know, Calvin Johnson. They could have had Joe Thomas, Adrian Peterson, Patrick Willis, Marshawn Lynch, Darrell Revis.
It's a heck of a draft
I mean,
class.
that was a heck of a draft class.
In 07.
And the Raiders missed on all of them.
Mm.
Another one on here in, you know, a fun one that I kind of wanted to bring up in the 2011 draft. There's 3 quarterbacks on this list that I brought that kind of all busted out of that 2011 quarterback draft, and that was 8th overall pick Jake Locker to the Titans, the 10th overall pick in Blaine Gabbert to the Jaguars, and then the 12th overall pick in Christian Ponder to the Vikings. All 3 of these teams missed out on the opportunity of drafting, you know, Mike Pouncey, the center, Ryan Kerrigan, Cam Jordan, running back Mark Ingram, and even like if they wanted a quarterback, even Andy Dalton was in that draft. So just very unfortunate. Cam Newton was also in that draft, but he was obviously taken number 1 overall, if I'm not mistaken. And then another good one here that, you know, I kind of like to go back to, not necessarily a bust of a player, but definitely a waste of a pick for a franchise struggling that really could have used a stud player like Bo Jackson, being the first overall pick in the 1986 drafted by the Buccaneers, who never played for the Buccaneers.
He said he wasn't going to play there, and they drafted him anyway.
It's
total
amazing.
80s Bucks move.
Total bust. But you know, there's quite a few, you know, that you can kind of go through and list over the years. You know, Tim Couch out of Kentucky, Brian Bosworth, the Boz out of Oklahoma, didn't really do anything for Seattle.
Johnny Manziel out of Texas A&M.
Yep.
Achilles Smith out of Oregon. Charles Rogers out of Michigan State. Trent Richardson, the stud out of Alabama.
He was a great running back at Alabama, and then just couldn't do anything in the league.
I don't know what the heck happened there. I
mean,
really don't.
And then it's not just running backs and receivers or these, you know, offensive linemen. You know, you got, or not receivers, quarterbacks. I mean, but you did have some receivers more recently, going back to the 2012 draft. Again, the
Justin
Jaguars.
Blackman.
5th overall pick of the Jaguars, and he just didn't. He couldn't do anything. Unfortunately, you know, he had sobriety issues. And off the field issues, but
it was sad.
Another one in 2017 was John Ross coming out as he got picked up by the Bengals in the 9th overall pick in that draft. I mean, he had a 4.22 speed 40 at the combine, and he just really hasn't done much. You know, the 2 seasons that after he got drafted, he just had 21 catches. I mean, that's nothing, and he still might be around the league somewhere on on some rosters somewhere and so forth, but really just haven't seen much out of him for sure.
Yep. I mean, it's just the draft is a guessing game. Don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise.
Oh, 100%. You don't know.
But-
There's no such thing as a sure thing. Maybe very, very, very few throughout NFL history you could consider a sure thing.
Peyton Manning was a sure thing.
Peyton Manning was a sure thing. Dan Marino was a sure thing.
And Tom Brady was anything but.
Was anything but taken in the 6th round, 199th overall.
Well, we really appreciate y'all listening. We know that we went a little over an hour on this puppy, but some fun information, some good information, and we hope you enjoyed it. And we'll come at you next week. Appreciate y'all very much, and hope y'all enjoy the draft this weekend.
Yes, sir. Take care.